If you're an internationally educated nurse and you're thinking about moving to Canada, one of the first questions that will always cross your mind is, where do I even start from? And that is a very valid question because it's an overwhelming process. It is not a one size fits all. And so it is understandable when people always ask the question, where do I start from? Because you don't know if you should start from NNAS, if you should start from WES, if you need to do the NCLEX first, or if you need to pursue your immigration first and abandon the other, or do the two simultaneously. Well, this is what we're going to talk about today on this channel. Welcome back to Nursing Canada. If you're new here, I help internationally educated nurses understand how to navigate the nursing process and move to Canada. I also share NCLEX tips and other things that internationally educated nurses need to know but is barely spoken about. Okay, let's get into the video. Now, the first thing that you need to understand is the province. There are 10 provinces and 3 territories in Canada, and each of these provinces have different rules and requirements for their internationally educated nurses. Now, I always like to make a reference. I am a Nigerian trained nurse, so my reference points will always be Nigeria. So let me paint it for you this way. In Nigeria, we have 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, but we have one regulatory body, which is the National Council for Nursing Council, I beg your pardon, which is the Nursing and Midwifery Council of Nigeria. We do not have a Nursing and Midwifery Council for Osun State, one for Lokoja, one for Abia State. No, we have a Nursing and Midwifery Council of Nigeria. That is for the Federation. That is not how it is in Canada. In Canada, the provinces, as you would refer to states in Nigeria, have their rules and their regulation and how they want to license their internationally educated nurses or their nurses generally. Okay, so what obtains in state A or in province A will not necessarily apply in the other provinces. And so choosing a province is the first place to start from, because when you go on each of the provinces' websites, the nursing regulator website, you will find a column for internationally educated nurses. That is where they break down the requirements. So you need to check and be sure that you meet this requirement for this particular province before you begin to invest your time, money, and energy. And that's why when people ask, where do I start from? We always ask, have you chosen the province, or what province do you want to come to? Because that helps you understand how to better help this individual. So that's step number 1, understanding the province that you want to go to. And then our step number 2 is to understand the difference between immigration and nursing registration. I will look into my tablet a few times because I have written these 10 points and I want us to break it down gradually so that you can understand what I am talking about. So, understanding the difference between immigration and nursing registration. Now, the nursing regulator or the nursing regulatory body is the one that gives you the authorization to practice as a nurse, right? So you have submitted documentation, you've done all the necessary steps, they have given you an authorization to test for the NCLEX. That is the responsibility of the nursing regulatory body. But getting that authorization to test, writing the NCLEX and passing the NCLEX does not automatically give you the legal right to live and work in Canada. That is where your immigration comes in. That is why we talk about getting into the express entry pool and trying to come into Canada legally as a permanent resident. When you come as a permanent resident, it makes things a little easier, a lot easier, not just even a little, a lot easier for you, okay? So we always advise, or I always advise, get into the express entry pool if you can. Max out the score, meet all the requirements. If you're lucky, you get nominated, and then you can begin to continue to plan your process, both for the nursing registration and your immigration as well. Okay, that is number 1. So now we've talked about understanding the province. We've also talked about understanding the difference between immigration and nursing registration, because they are 2 different things. The next thing you want to do is to complete the required credential on nursing assessment. And that's our point number 3. Because depending on the province or the pathway that you have chosen, you need to understand what is required. Some provinces still require that aside from your immigration, you do the NNAS, that is the National Nursing Assessment Service. That is what Canada uses to assess their internationally educated nurses, somewhat like what the people in the US use or refer to as CGFNS. So that is what our own CGFNS is in Canada. Now, you also need to understand that the provinces are getting a little more flexible, and they are understanding that there are shortcomings with some of these things that hold people back. And so some of the provinces are accepting of West, not West for immigration. So you also need to do that research to find out what is applicable and what is obtainable in the province that you want to work with. If they will accept what you're using for immigration, if they are going to do an expedited NNAS, So again, this is all overwhelming information, but you need to sit down and dissect and break it down. Okay? Now, not every assessment serves the same purpose, so you really need to understand that part about this whole process. And then once you have chosen a province, you understand the difference between nursing registration and immigration. You have compiled the documents that you think you need. This is the part where you need to now start collating everything, and this can take time. The reason why I say collating your document or gathering your documents can take time is because you have one control, and the control you have is maybe making the payment, but you do not have control on how and when your school might respond. You do not have control as to how and when your nursing regulatory body is also going to respond in terms of your verification. These things take a while, and if anything, you're also always advised to start a little earlier, just so that you're not caught up, hurrying up and being against time or working against time. These are the reasons why you need to talk about these things, or you need to gather these documents and start planning ahead. That's point number 4. We'll move on to point number 5, and that is apply to the nursing regulator. Now that you have established the province that you want to go to, you have checked on their website what is required for internationally educated nurses, then you can apply to the nursing regulator. The nursing regulator would have obviously some requirements, so you need to start turning in those documentation and things like your language test. If your language of instruction was not in English, they might require you to submit something to show for that. Keep in mind that if the regulator is asking you for an English test exam, maybe a CELPIP or an IELTS, be sure that they are not asking for a like an academic, and you want to use that same academic for your immigration. It doesn't work that way. If you're getting into the express entry pool, you need your CELPIP or IELTS general model, not academic model. So you need to be sure of what is being requested on each end. Every IEN application is not necessarily always going to be the same. So people are different. You're going to different provinces. Different things are required. Now we're going to move to point 6. Meet the examination requirements. When you meet the examination requirements, the province gives you an authorization to test. That's the nursing regulatory body of the province gives you an authorization to test. You then have to write the NCLEX, and if you pass the NCLEX, you need to start thinking about getting the actual license to practice. Complete any remaining registration requirements, because sometimes they might tell you, oh, your education doesn't meet up, we need you to do this bridge, or we need you to do this transition to practice, or we need you to do this or do that. So you need to be sure that you have met all the requirements. Passing the NCLEX does not mean that you are licensed automatically. There's still a few things that you need to meet. Finalize your immigration or your work authorization. That's important because, like I said, you need the legal ability to be able to work in Canada. And then the next thing that you also want to try to do is to plan for the reality of relocation. This is the one that hits people differently, because sometimes you spend so much time on the NCLEX and every other thing that you don't pay attention to the realities that come with the relocation. Plan for your life after you arrive. Okay, guys, I hope that this has helped you. If you want a part 2, I can take my time and do a part 2. I just wanted to get everything into this. I will see you in my next one. Thank you.